Coming back to the picture-in-picture technique we created in the previous video, what we can do here is maybe create some alternatives. Let's select the work we did and go back to the objects and animation screen, because we've got some alternatives here. Remember, with the background I decided to blur the background, blurred 22%, because the previous image is the sharp version of this. So as this dissolves onto the screen, it goes blur, ready to present those portrait format images. I'm going to switch this image around just for a change. So I want to double click the R here to remove the blur, because the image I'm going to replace it with is the blurred image I showed earlier. This one here. Now as we bring the cursor across, now the inset images are going to come up on screen over the top of that particular image. I've also decided I'd like to have a little bit more thickness in the edge line here, so you can see it a bit more clearly while we're looking at it here at 50%. So I'll just take that up to 6 pixels, I think. Let's click into that area. It just looks a little bit better. Wouldn't it be nice if, while we were enjoying those 3 inset images, that the background image changed for the next one in the sequence, which could be this one, and then the 3 inset images were gradually removed from the screen? We'd obviously need more time to do that. So let's close the objects and animation screen and think about this for a moment. Now, in actual fact, would we need any more time or not? If we're only going to change the background, well, let's see if we can get away with not changing anything here. But we know we can come back and make changes at any time. So let's go back in and think about what we want to do. The first thing we perhaps need to think about is the next image we're going to bring up. Instead of bringing it up as a separate image as we did before, we're going to bring it into the objects and animation screen. So I'm going to click into the grey area, go and get the image. This is the one in question. It's in the wrong place now, and I don't want this one to get confused, so let me call this one background 2, so we know this is the one we're going to fade onto. Background 2 is at the wrong place in the stack. It's covering everything else up. We've got to move it down. We can do that by right clicking, if I can find my little rocker switch here. Right click, choose order, and we can choose back one, but here's a nice shortcut, control page down, and I generally use that. And as you can see, I can just step it all the way down, but I do need it sitting over the top of my original background. So let's think about what we're doing here. In fact, I'll tell you what we can do here. We can select the background and the 3 inset images so we can see all of the keyframes together just for a moment. Because what we want to happen with background 2, we want that to be transparent, probably until, I don't know, somewhere around 3 seconds in. So while we're enjoying those images, and they're not fully on screen yet, so the background can just make a start in appearing, how long do we want this to take to come on screen? Well, we could have it coming on screen over quite a lengthy period, really. So let's go to this point and put a clone in there, Alt Insert. So from this point, this image here needs to be invisible. Let me put my cursor here and see if we can get a feel for what we've done. There's the images, but gradually the background is going to change. But what we need to do then is to remove those 3 images from the screen. So we are going to need more time, aren't we? Because we've got to have another set, 2 sets really, of these keyframes. So let's give ourselves a little more time. Probably going to need Let's try 15 seconds. Objects and animation screen. What I need to do is to create 2 more keyframes for each of the inset images. Let me Alt Insert and Alt Insert. Select the next one and do the same, and the next one and do the same. Why do we want 2? Well, let's get these out of the way just for a minute. What we need to do is, if we're saying from this keyframe we want these images to fade up solid on screen, between 4 seconds, and I think we said we'd want them on screen for about 4 seconds, so these need to be at the 8-second point. Let me reselect those. Between those 2 points we want nothing to happen, so we actually need a keyframe there. But then we need to remove these from the screen, and if we felt it took 3 seconds to bring them on, makes sense to give 3 seconds to take them off. Maybe we'll put these keyframes at 11 seconds. And then the images fade off. Doesn't leave us too long to enjoy the picture, so we may want to even add maybe a couple of more seconds. But I think before we do that, we need to actually do a full screen preview, or certainly look at this in the mini player. And of course we could have this lined up with that, so that by the time these start to fade off, this image is fully on screen. Something else we could do as well. If we go back to where we've decided the image is going to start to appear on screen, we could put a bit of blur on it as well, like we did before. Now 22 worked well last time, so let's close down the objects and animation screen and give a little look at what we've done. Images still look good coming on screen, but now that gentle change from the background, and then we move on. I think that works reasonably well. Now it is possible that we need a little more time here, because this image now has been used in here, so we could actually say that one is superfluous. Let's bring down another one in its place and take a look at that, because that's going to give us a better idea on how long that new background is on screen. Is it a little bit rushed? Only a view like this will enable us to see, and of course we will need the music in place too. Well, I think the jury's out on that. I think that rather depends on the soundtrack, but it didn't look too unappealing on the eye, did it? Now I've changed things yet again in the objects and animation screen, but before we take a look at what I've done, let's just press play so you get a feel for the result of what I've done. Here I've decided to have the images coming up 1, 2, 3, and of course we can choose whether they come up with the left one first, then the middle, then the right, or that we have them coming up with the one in the middle and then the 2 on the outside edge. Let me come back to the image in question and go back to the objects and animation screen. Now if you remember a little while ago, we was all completely lined up, something like this, because all 3 of these were coming up together. So they come up at the 3-second point there I've chose to 6 seconds. No problem with that. But now we can choose to move them and stagger all of these keyframes, and we get the opportunity to decide which image appears first. And this is where those change of names can come in quite handy, because we could change this one to say L, left, center, and right. I often do this, it just makes life that little bit easier. So if we wanted them to come up left first, then the center, I could even shuffle these around. So I could hold the control key, page down, Or I could even do it the other way. Let's put them up the other way. Control key, page up, Control key, page up. So now we're working left, center, right. So everything falls into place. So let's select all three. And you can see what I did here. I selected this keyframe and this keyframe, and I moved it more or less in the center. It's not critical where we place it. Same thing with these two, and I moved that down to there, and that created our staggered 3 inset images appearing on screen. And of course the other alternative is to say, well, let's have the center one coming up first, and let's have the other two coming up either side simultaneously. You can see quite quick and easy to adjust these and the timings between them. And of course we don't always need to have the images uniform like this. It's quite okay from time to time to maybe have one image overlapping the other. So if we take our central image here and we go back to our animation tab, let's go back to the first keyframe, because we'd need to change both of these, but maybe if I change the second one first where it's solid on screen, it will make a bit more sense. What I'm going to do is to increase the size a little bit. So I think I'll just click and drag. I don't want it touching top and bottom, but let's see how I've managed to do that. It's overlapping the images, not overlapping really as well as I'd like. So what we could do maybe is to switch it with a square. Let's select the center image, go to the properties, and switch it round for that other one I prepared, which is probably going to be a little more suitable. Here you can see we do need to change the stacking order. So again, select the center, control and page up, because we need it sitting at the top now, unless of course we want it at the bottom, in which case we page down. You can see the opportunities we've got here. So if I select that and go to the animation, we've got a zoom of 95. I do need to make sure I put 95 in there so we don't see a zoom when it appears on screen. So there's the first image that's going to appear, and then the other two can appear over the top. But if we're going to cover up the image in the center, then we might want to take maybe the left and right. We'll look at them all together, but if we identify the left and right here, we may decide to move them just a little bit. So we may want to give a bit of time. Let's just give it another second. Sometimes that's all we need. Center comes up. While we're enjoying that, then the outer images appear. If we don't feel that's long enough, we can select one keyframe, hold the shift key, select the last, move it to the 8-second point and give that a try. Very quick and easy to do that and get a feel for how this is all going to look. Of course, we may need final tweaks when we have this with music. Now there are so many more different techniques that we could demonstrate here, but they're all based on the theme. If I just press play here, you can see I've just made another small change where the center image will appear on screen, but when the outer images appear, the center image goes to black and white, or it could go to sepia tone. So the emphasis now is thrown to the color images, which tend to take our attention rather than the black and white. But the way we create it is no different to the keyframe work we've been doing up to now. There's the center image identified at the bottom. There's the first of the keyframes, which brings it on screen. I've got it doing nothing from 6 seconds to 9 seconds, but from 9 seconds, when the others start to come up, to 12 seconds, what I've got on this keyframe is, I've got two things. First of all, I took the saturation completely off but that left the image looking a little flat. If I just double click, you can see it looks a little flat, so I just decided to put a bit of contrast and brightness in there just to give it a balance with the other two. So quick and easy to achieve, just moving the keyframes around. But isn't it great that we can see all of the keyframes together? Now I do need to bring this section to a close because there's almost no limit to the variation we can apply here. This is where your creativity needs to come to the fore. Let me just play this once again because I've just made a quick change here to finish. I have removed the black and white change to the center image. So we have the center coming up as normal, and either side we're going to have the other two. Then of course, once it's run its course, we go to the next image in the sequence. So to bring this section to a close, let's just deal with one other option that you can use here. Let's select this image and make a copy of it. Control C, Control V. What we've got is an absolute copy including all of the inset images. So let's select it and open the Objects and Animation screen. What I'm going to do here is change all of the images. So I'm going to select the left hand image, go to the picture option in the Properties tab, and I did have to find another image, so let's select this one. And the right hand image, let's go and change that for this one. And I've got a new one for the center too, just a square image, this one here. So when we run this, we're going to see exactly the same as what we saw before. But perhaps what we could do here is have this particular image taking over from the previous one, which means we've just got to change the keyframes a little bit. So let's select all three of these so we can see the keyframes in question. Because what I think we need is, all of these right back down to that point, and these two as well, so that when this starts to fade on screen, these three images can be seen instantly, which means I need to select the keyframes and adjust what we did before with the opacity. I'll double click this time. Now I could either decide to change these images using these keyframes, but for our demonstration purposes I think that's going to be sufficient to get across what I had in mind. So once again, and for the last time, I think we'll just select this image, press play and watch what we have. And you can see how you can start to link picture in picture together. Outside images appearing, but now all of those images are going to change together. But we would have the opportunity using the keyframes now to decide exactly what we want to do with those. The two outer ones could be removed first, or the middle one first. You can see the variety we can choose.